Welcome to the Float Podcast, an entrepreneurial journey. My name is Nick Janicki, once a wide-eyed hippie with purple dreadlocks, and now the founder of the True Rest Float Spa, the fastest growing floating franchisor in the world, and CEO of FloatPod Technologies, the industry leader in float pods. Follow me along in my entrepreneurial journey with what will become the next billion-dollar industry to enter the health and wellness sector. Let's connect with world-class athletes, actors, musicians, doctors, industry experts, and explore the mindsets of powerful entrepreneurs. Let's get this floating party started. Super awesome episode coming up with Adam Trombley, who is a scientist, been around for a long time, very well-known, basically zero-point energy scientist. He actually met with John C. Lilly and was very good friends with John C. Lilly, whom was the founder of floating. So John C. Lilly is the man who basically invented the float tank and how to float. And there were some other researchers at the time that helped him as well. But this is a great interview about Adam Trombley's meeting John C. Lilly and the trials and tribulations of him going through stage 4 cancer and how he got through that. And we'll have future episodes with Adam. He kind of got halfway through a couple stories that we want to continue on with him. So stay tuned. This is the first of quite a few with Mr. Adam Trombley. Thank you very much. All right, we're here with Adam Trombley, who graciously let us be in his house for this interview. And I met you about a year ago, and you have an isopod that helped you set up. But you've told me some stories that were just really unbelievable to me about meeting John C. Lilly, the circumstances of you meeting him, what he did for you, and then kind of your journey through flotation. So tell us just a little bit about your background for people that don't know, and how you got involved with meeting John C. Lilly.
Okay. Well, professionally, I'm a scientist.
Yes.
And I started something called Project Earth with Buckminster Fuller.
Project
Earth.
Okay.
With Buckminster Fuller. Was conceived of actually at his home in Carbondale, Illinois, in the wee hours of the morning, back in 1969, 1970. And basically I have continued in my life to not focus too much on just one area. Although I focused in astrophysics initially. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He made me promise not to allow what he said. He says, don't allow this global vision that you've been gifted with to die an over-specialized death.
Understood.
And so I've done my best to try to breathe my way through, not getting into that kind of calcification that happens when people get over-specialized.
Yep.
In the midst of all of that happening, I got involved with consciousness exploration. Mm-hmm. I got involved with early psychedelic exploration when it was still right in the point where it was transitioning from legal to illegal.
About what year?
1967.
Okay.
And it had been legal. Mm-hmm. And then I think in 1972, John came out with Center of the Cyclone.
Okay.
And I got a copy of the book, and I was impressed because I was quite young. I was impressed with the fact that here was this well-known scientist who was speaking about himself in a very kind of intimate way in that book.
Yes, introspective.
Very introspective and very self-critical.
Yes.
And I really appreciated that. Okay. I mean, I'd read Tim Leary's Politics of Ecstasy. Mm-hmm. I didn't know either one of these gentlemen at that point. And basically, I saw this vista of this that he was portraying that was really, really articulate. And I mean, the vista, he articulated this new kind of view of reality differently than anybody I had heard. Mm-hmm. Differently, I'd heard Tim Leary. I had met Tim Leary, come to think of it. I'd met Tim Leary on William F. Buckley's The Firing Line. I was in the green room because he was a friend of my mother's. And I got to sit in on this show he was making with Tim Leary, which was really interesting to see William F. Buckley with Timothy Leary. But anyway, the fact is that I wasn't overly impressed with Tim Leary. That would be an understatement, actually. At that point, later on, different. Okay, so the thing I have to say is that I kind of made a wish that I could be in the company of people who were adults, number one, who were scientists, who were intellectually rigorous but not suffering from rigor mortis. And that they were actually willing to explore consciousness. Because consciousness was blooming all over the place.
And I remember you told me before, was this when you had some bout of the cancer?
No, not yet.
Not yet?
No, I hadn't had cancer yet. Thank God. Later. No, basically, then like I made a wish that I thought to myself, and over my lifetime I realized that sometimes we think these things to ourselves without appreciating the fact that we are actually causal participants in what manifests in our lives. And I know that you're exploring this more and more in your life.
Sure.
And we really are causal participants. And so I made a wish. I would like to meet John Lilly. I would like someday to be able to hang out with him. I read more of his books and really wanted to float, really wanted to find a place where I could float.
And it wasn't as accessible.
And it was it was like almost non-extant at that point, because he invented it, even though he invented it at National Institutes of Health. There's these other people who now claim that they were also there and kind of thing. But John was the guy who burst the membrane. He was the guy who burst through that weird academic posturing. There wasn't any of that. That smells like death to me. Because I was surrounded by PhDs and MDs and lawyers when I was a kid. My parents that was their social circle. And
so he cultivated the thesis essentially.
He lost his mind. He lost his conventional orientation. And he was a genius to start out with. And then I could go off into all kinds of little tangents about John and his implantation of dolphin brains for the U.S. Navy.
How did you eventually finally meet him in person?
In 1989, we were both speaking at a conference at the United Nations in New York in June of 1989. And when he was before me, and when he went up on the stage, he tripped on the top stair, going up to the podium at Dag Hammarskjöld Auditorium. He was in a jumpsuit, like a NASA jumpsuit, and everybody else was in suits. And there was John, and looking altogether like the astronaut in 2001: Space Odyssey after he comes back from his psychedelic trip through infinite consciousness. And then he walked up to the microphone and he says, "Now you're going to have to figure out whether I did that on purpose to get your attention or whether I'm just an old man who tripped on the top stair." He said, "Nonetheless, I got your attention." And he had the room. And this was a packed house. Dag Hammarskjöld's a big auditorium, and it was packed.
How old was he then?
God, 70. I see, in 89. How old was John in 89? He had to be 71, so I think something like that. I should know that, but I'm not. Right.
So you have the conference together.
So he spoke, and then I came back and we did a demonstration. We were supposed to do a demonstration of this technology, solid state technology that generated 50 plus times the amount of power that it used. And we were supposed to do that, and we got to the United Nations, and my good friend Noel Brown, who was at that time head of the United Nations Environment Program, with whom I had worked quite a bit, said, "I'm sorry, the security people freaked out, and you're now going to do the demonstration at the Church of the Holy Covenant, which is this abandoned church about a block and a half away, and that's where you have to do the demonstration because they can secure that."
Got it.
And the New York Police Department, I have to say, was really cooperative. Anyway, so we did a demonstration, and we physically demonstrated 54 times more power coming out of the device than went into it.
Okay. And
walked to the United Nations so I could deliver my address. And I had my press agent with me, Lillian Firestone, who had like big clients like Bacardi Rum and, you know, the New York Jets and stuff like that. And she's this little old gal, and she's crying all the way to the United Nations, going, "I can't believe it, the whole world is going to change. This really works. You just demonstrated it physically." And and we got there, and there was it was a packed house, packed. And I got up and spoke, and very receptive audience from all over the world. It was the United Nations, and there were people from all over the world, and I, you know, addressed the Indian delegation that they knew about Paramahansa Tewari, who had duplicated in a facsimile form at any rate. The first generator that I had co-invented with Joseph Kahn, who was my first young co-worker.
Right.
I wouldn't call him a protege so much as he was he was an essential element in the first invention. Absolutely. I wouldn't call him a protege. Joe was just we used to call him Boy Wonder.
Right.
And really good with just extraordinarily fun, good math.
Good math.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and so this was way beyond the first generator. This was a solid state device that was kind of a redevelopment of something I worked on with Marcel Vogel, which we called the 0-point module at Sci Research in San Jose when I was working with Marcel. And this was something that generated a lot more power at Marcel's as well, but there were 3 generals and an admiral who showed up for a demonstration, and all these 1,000-watt light bulbs were being lit by this little input going into the device, which was much more elegant, actually, in a lot of ways than what we demonstrated in New York. And this guy said, "Just think of the weapon systems we can make with this." And all the lights went out just at that moment.
Really?
And when the box was opened up, which was this hexagonal wooden box with these sockets for the crystals in it, because these were quartz crystals inside of it, all the crystals were a powder. And so this was made differently. This was actually not made with quartz crystals. It was made with quartz tape and a coil around the quartz tape around a wooden spool, basically. Yeah. And so we wouldn't have hysteresis with the coil spool material.
Got it.
And so I had everybody who was at the demonstration, heads of the 5 top houses on Wall Street were there, because a good friend, Josh Mailman, had helped arrange for that. God bless him. And there were all kinds of people there. I mean, it was, like I said, it was a packed house.
Right.
And everybody stood up who was at the demonstration. And then I asked Chuck Clark from Boeing to stay standing, and this was not rehearsed. And I said, "Please tell everybody here who you are." And he says, "Well, I'm Chuck Clark. I'm a senior engineer for Boeing, but I'm not really representing Boeing here.
Okay.
I'm representing an investment group, and who basically had hired him to debunk the technology."
Interesting.
And he says, "I know all the tricks that people use to make it look like something like this is happening. None of those tricks are being used. This is the real thing. I can't explain to you how it works, but I can guarantee you it does work."
Right.
And that was a big deal to have a senior engineer from Boeing say this in the middle of Dag Hammarskjöld Auditorium.
Yes.
It really upset some people, actually, at the United Nations. They got really angry that I was doing this whole thing.
I believe
And
you.
that the woman who had invited me to participate with the conference has told me on more than one occasion over the years since then,
Right.
just how upset they got. Well, it took me an hour and a half to get from the front of the auditorium to the back, literally. It was just before lunch. And it took me an hour and a half, and when I got to the back of the auditorium, there was John standing there in his jumpsuit, and he says, "Hi, I'm John Lilly." And I said, "Hi, I've wanted to meet you for a really long time." And he said,
Wow.
"Well, I'm coming out of retirement because of you."
Really?
And
Wow.
and I said, "Wow, that's great." And he says, "Yeah, I didn't think there was going to be a future, but now I think maybe there's going to be a future, and I think I would like to have some kind of participation in helping that happen, if you don't mind." And me, I was like, "Yeah, if I don't mind, yeah,
Right.
yeah, I don't mind. Of course I don't mind, And I would love for that. I'd be honored."
Right.
And so then we wandered off together for a little while, and then the interviews started, and he says, "Well, I want to do an interview too." So this group that was kind of doing a CNN contract.
Okay.
CNN was pretty young
Yeah.
still. It wasn't super young anymore, but it was still rolling, getting going, and so John did this great interview, which I'm trying to get the videotape right now of
really?
that interview.
Interesting.
And I interviewed with the same people. At any rate, so that's how we met.
Yeah,
That's how we
sure.
finally physically met. He said, "I feel like I know you from other dimensions." And I said, "I'm sure that we do."
Yeah.
And he says, "Yeah, okay." And so, and then that was just the beginning of, we became good friends. And he was very generous with me. I went out to his house in 1991, in April of 1991, to speak at a conference called Echo Expo at the Los Angeles
Okay.
Convention Center. A lot of Hollywood people were there, and
Had you floated by this point?
oh yeah,
Okay.
I'd floated by that point, yeah. And John had invited me to stay at his house in Malibu, which I hadn't done before. And at that point, I was in late 4th stage with cancer,
Okay.
and actually had been given, or was given, during that trip, these 5 young doctors who had kind of followed me around from campus to campus when they had the opportunity to break away,
Okay.
because I was speaking a lot back then. And these guys would show up, and they kept saying, "What can we do? What can we do?" And I said, "Well, I know I'm dying of cancer, but I'd like to have a clearer prognosis than I have right now.
Right.
And if you could help me with that." So anyway, so they delivered their verdict, which was 2 to 4 months. I was in excruciating pain. I'm allergic to opiates, so I couldn't do opiates.
Right.
Thank God. And so I went to John's house that evening, and he used to have this big easy chair with an old funky sheepskin on it, like a lazy boy with this funky sheepskin. And he said, "So what's the prognosis?" And I told him, and he goes, "Leave me alone." So it was his house. I said, "Sure." And just at the moment he said, "Leave me alone," the phone rang, and it was in the office, which was in the house. And I went and answered. It was my daughter.
Okay.
And my daughter was 12 years old. Actually, she was just 13. She turned 13 that January. And she'd been having really lucid dreams about the Kuwaiti oil fires. And she goes, "Dad, they're much worse than they say."
Right.
And I didn't know that I'd been on Peter Jennings that night.
Okay.
I didn't, because they were actually at the Echo Expo,
Right.
and Woody Harrelson had come up and given me a big hug, and I'd
Yeah.
gotten a big response to what I'd said, which is basically I said that the Bush administration was lying to everybody about the Kuwaiti oil fires, that it was a much worse situation.
Right.
And well, John, when I came back into the room from my conversation with my daughter said to me, "Dad, you've always taught me that love is the most powerful power of all powers. So you have to get these fires out."
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to tell my daughter in Colorado that I had just been given 2 to 4 months to live.
Right.
And I had always taught her that. And I said, well, let's make a prayer.
Right. Right.
And so we breathed together on the phone, and I came into the living room, and there was John, and he is like this, and he rolls his eyes down, and he goes, "Well, Echo just said that you're not going to die. You have too much work to do. You got to get the Kuwaiti oil fires out." And I said, "Okay then." And I told him, he said, "So who was that?" And I said, "That was my daughter, Jacqueline." So he goes, "Bet she's concerned, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, she's really concerned about her future." And he said, "She should be." He says, "But Echo's told me that everything's going to be taken care of."
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never done ketamine at that point.
Yeah.
So you're asking me this question,
Yeah.
and it was about, actually, it wasn't too much, it was maybe an hour later. I'm really not sure, because I have never in my entire life had a sense of time. And the doorbell rang, and it was this pathologist who showed up, an Iranian pathologist.
Invited or coincidence?
Nobody had invited him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was Oxford educated, but not licensed in California. And his father had been the Shah of Iran's oncologist, and the Shah of Iran's nephew, Charan Pahlavi, was on my board of directors for my company, which was called 0 Point Technologies.
Okay.
And Charan's an amazing being. He's really a wonderful man, wonderful man. And so I said, "Okay, then what are you here for?" Because I had to answer the door. There was nobody else there at that moment. And he says, "I was just sitting in meditation. I was told to come over here and bring my medical bag," which was full of ketamine.
Right.
And I said, having just been given a 2 to 4 month prognosis and being in pretty much excruciating pain all the time,
right,
with no relief, except for, some relief from hemisync, some relief from meditation.
Okay.
I wasn't like writhing in pain or anything. I was functional.
Sure.
I was doing everything. I was traveling like crazy, lecturing everywhere, and living my life, but dying.
Mm-hmm.
And then he started telling me about this experimental program of using ketamine to help kill cancer by injecting tumors. Just one trial, one patient actually turned out. I thought it was a trial, like a clinical trial, in Germany. And
one trial.
One patient had been,
wow,
and he found out about it somehow. And you have to remember, this is like the internet had not really been fully born yet. And we did have a website at that time, believe it or not. In 1981, 89 actually, we had a website already. 88 we had a website. In the very beginning of the internet, really, for Project Earth. But anyway, so, he proceeded to have me read the PDR, etc., and I did, so I said, okay, fine, And I laid down on John Lilly's living room floor, with my feet pointed between his two big Klipschorn speakers there, and he put on Structures in Silence by Stephen Roach, which is I use it in the tank still sometimes. And And I was injected with way too much ketamine for a first time in some ways. But the thing that happens is it goes to the most ancient receptors in the brain, way senior to opiate receptors. Okay. And your body, you are convinced that you just died.
Okay. Yep.
Unless somebody properly prepares you, metaprograms you. I had been properly metaprogrammed.
Okay.
Okay. I had been informed that this is you're going to think you died.
Mm-hmm.
And you may get angry, but just relax because you didn't die. Millions of people have had this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's used for geriatric patients and pediatric patients. Just relax.
Right.
This is before they put all the junk in it that made it weird and neurotoxic. The preservatives, they call them. Preserving the status quo is more like it. And eventually, I did the tank there and on ketamine, and he left Philip and Craig, who are both well known in the float community, for me, and gave me his house.
Mm-hmm.
He was going with Barbara Clark Lilly to the Bahamas to do a dolphin project at the foundation.
Right.
And he said, have at it. And so for the next 2 weeks, basically, that's all we did.
Mm-hmm.
And
wow.
and in the midst of the first time, I was OBE
mm-hmm.
and flying with these beings,
which is out of body.
Out of body.
For those that don't know.
Yeah. I was out of body, and I was attended to by these two beings who we all felt like one being
mm-hmm.
with kind of three twinkles or something.
This was in the pod, or in the tank?
No, this was just on his living room floor.
Okay.
Actually, at that point, and I was in the Kuwaiti oil fields, seeing this in a level of lucidity, and being informed that I would serve an essential function in getting these things put out, and fulfilling my daughter's prayer,
mm-hmm.
and proving once again that love is the most powerful power of all powers. Although in this world, watching the evening news, it's hard to believe that sometimes.
Yes.
It sounds like goofy New Age baloney.
Right.
But in point of fact, it's not. And everything I was not invited to go to Kuwait. I was not invited to go to Saudi Arabia. As of that moment, I just criticized the President of the United States and the administration. Not so much the President, but the administration.
So now this is...
On national television, on Peter Jennings.
Right.
And because they put part of my speech on national news that night.
Right.
Where I was saying they're lying through their teeth,
mm-hmm.
And yet, somehow or other, from April the 19th to May the 21st, on May the 21st, I was on a plane to Saudi Arabia with my team,
Now what happened to the cancer?
The cancer wasn't killed off completely,
mm-hmm.
but it was killed off enough by the combination of that with that tissue. See, it's a neurotrope.
Mm-hmm.
So when it combined with the neurofibrosarcoma tissue, it basically was rejected by the body. The tissue suddenly it woke my immune system up. So it was perfect.
Interesting.
And instead of killing the nerves, it actually did the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And so it turned out that it was probably the only possible way I could have survived at that minute. So it's literally true that if I hadn't been at John's at that moment,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be sitting here 24 years later,
right.
talking to you.
Right.
And from John's perspective, which he had tried to vaccinate as many people with as possible, it was just the choreography of ECHO, of the Earth Coincidence Control Office organization.
Mm-hmm.
It was completely understandable as such, as participating in reality,
right.
participating in the psychophysics of reality. And So since you asked that question, I think that, and so what happened was that it allowed me to get to the next step. It didn't work forever. It didn't cure it.
Right. Okay.
But it worked from 1991 until November of 1994, where I was back in fourth stage again. But it was that period of time had been given to me, and at John's 80th birthday party, Nancy and I went to his birthday party on Maui, and at his 80th birthday party, he introduced me to somebody. And that person turned me on to the next step.
Okay.
So all of this, in answer to your question, is a part of the whole psychophysical dance that we're all involved in. And you never know. Somebody tells you something with great authority, like you're going to die. And which is one of the reasons why I try to be careful not to be too fatalistic about what's happening on Earth right now. Because as much as everything I know, and I have spent my entire adult life studying this, and from not from the perspective of an over-specialized guy, but from the perspective of someone who also had the influence of Buckminster Fuller and several other really amazing, John Archibald Wheeler. I mean, I've had amazing mentors. Not the least of which is John Lilly. And with that broad perspective, comprehensive as much as possible, but never with the illusion that you know everything.
Yep.
You know, the first step in the dialogues of Plato, I think it's Socrates who says the first step on the path of wisdom is the confession of ignorance. And I tried to start my morning with that. John loved that quote, by the way. He says, yeah, that's right, every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
You start every day with the confession that no matter how much I think I know, no matter how much authority I can speak with about any subject, I still don't know what it is.
Right.
Fundamentally. I mean, in the sense of being able to, there's no frozen moment.
Right, sure.
There's no such thing as stasis. So all of this is this psychophysical projection of fluidity riding in this sea of consciousness, riding in this luminous sea of consciousness. Not luminous in the sense that it's emanating from a God sitting on a throne in some central location in the midst of infinity, because there is no central location in the midst of infinity. And, you know, infinitely present everywhere is something that you can't get your brain around. That's the point.
Can't be quantified.
You know, and John understood that. John understood that that the tank, when you start just being able to really fundamentally relax, it's like Milarepa also at a certain point, after years and years of effort, to the point he had calluses on his butt. Literally, he had, from you sitting on rock all the time, probably on a deer skin or something, but still had calluses. And he woke up and he went, "Oh, this is completely effortless." And what the blessing that sensory deprivation plus sensory enhancement now that tanks are evolving, that we can help augment and induce states of consciousness that don't necessarily require any psychedelics or anything like that, but in and of themselves, the enhancement of the environment can help us effortlessly relax into primary consciousness, seamlessness. Absolutely. The real, you could call it the esoteric meaning of the seamless garment. I had a wonderful conversation with him one time, because I was in his tank on Maui, and I came out, and nobody was around, and he didn't even know I was in there. And I came out and he says, "Well, I guess you've been in the tank, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Huh?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, I just realized that seamless garment is actually, he says, "Actually seamless garment. No seams." Like that. And he was right there. And this is at a time when a lot of people had dismissed him. there's another interesting, if I can, just a little story.
Absolutely.
We were at Jordy Hermel's house from Hormel Meat fame in Paradise Valley. He was also my board of directors, and he was a good friend of John's. And John was there. This is 1991. This is also 1991. A little bit later, like a month later. And he says, people think that I'm damaged by drugs and I'm a crazy old man. And he had 5 books sitting by this Chase Lounge by Jordy's Olympic-sized swimming pool at this ginormous mansion he had there. And just down the hill from Barry Goldwater's house. And he says, pick up any of those books to any page and just tell me the page number.
Yep.
So I picked up 2 of the books, and I'll never forget it. I picked up the first one, I opened it up to page 145. And I said, page 145, and he goes, okay. He said, which paragraph? I said, paragraph 3. So he starts to recite verbatim. He was that eidetic.
Yep.
He was that eidetic. So completely the opposite of what people were saying was actually true. This guy who they were saying was completely a mess,
right,
still had eidetic memory.
Now, how do you think that stigma was gained? Was some of it self?
Well, he was, some of it he created himself. Yeah. He did outrageous things.
Right.
He did completely outrageous things.
To get a rise, or just to prove a point, or what do you think the meaning was?
I think that throughout history, realized beings have sometimes gone into this outrageous phase of doing things. And I think to whatever degree John was realized, and that's not for me to judge. Mm-hmm. I can only say that he was much more conscious than almost anybody I've ever met. And much more facile with dimensions, with multiple dimensions, and much more aware of this issue of participating in life, participating in the causality.
Right.
Understanding that we're in this field of being, and that the divine isn't somebody somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And it isn't summarized in any of us either. Right. It isn't like, I represent this and I now confer God on you.
Yes, right.
Which I'm not, obviously I'm just using that as a metaphor, but people get into that kind of, they put themselves in that kind of position. And John didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And because when you really wake up, you know that there is no container, although it's kind of a paradox about floating. Mm-hmm. Because in floating, here we are voluntarily climbing into
a literal
this kind of, I always think of it in terms of a kind of a amnionic environment,
mm-hmm. Yes.
And we're every time we're going through this process, if we're fortunate, we can go into this simple state of complete and total relaxation. Yeah. If we're really fortunate. And that takes a lot of, sometimes it's not the first time or the second time or the third time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes a lot of times, because even now for me, and I've been doing all meditation and floating and for a long, long, long time, there's some days when I go into the tank and my shoulders are all knotted up and And you know how you feel that. It's like, absolutely. Whoa, you become really aware of that.
Hyper-aware.
You become hyper-aware of that. And then if you know what to do and you breathe and relax it, then it just goes. And I think with the evolution of the tank as it's happening right now, to have circulation, for example, to have the ability to not have to be concerned about pathogens. And to have an environment that's supportive. It's always really, really important to respect the process. Yes. Even if you go to a float center, to respect the process, when you come out of the tank, to give yourself time to come out of the tank.
Absolutely.
Because it's not going to be in the first 5 minutes after you come out of the tank. Even if nothing seemed to happen.
Yes.
Because you're going to relax more than you've ever relaxed before.
Yes.
You are.
Yes.
I mean, and that's the nature of floating. And the blessing of floating ultimately is the enhancement of and the augmentation of the realization that it isn't through effort that we become conjoined with the divine. It's through relaxation.
Yes.
That we drop our own boundaries. We shed our own snake skins,
yes,
so to speak. And we let all of that go. And with John, it was just a lot of, I mean, you know, we had a lot of journeys together.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were, a couple of them were rather intense, even. One was particularly difficult when he was almost dying in the hospital at one point. And everybody left the room, and I just went and kind of went out and came back with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Thank you for that. I appreciate that." But that's a very intimate moment.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he continued to live until he was much more ready to go, and he chose exactly where he wanted to go, and he went to Los Angeles and went to that hospital and left from there.
Right. Yep.
You know, and it's, see, all of this process that is so malleable, it's so changeable, and yet because we have, as a species, denied
mm-hmm.
our connection, we kind of exist in this state of, we tend to be programmed, meta-programmed, to exist in a state of dissociated awareness, unawareness.
Right.
You know, feeling separate from everything. Feeling like a little mote.
Yes. Right.
You know, instead of feeling, and there's all kinds of threatening things that allow us to kind of seize up in that tension. And again, at a time like this is a time more than any other that has ever occurred in history where we need as many people to wake up as possible.
Right.
We need as many people to realize that waking up is all about profound relaxation.
Yes.
We need as many people as possible to then become more and more integrated into the real context, the real physics
yep.
of existence, of being itself. And to bring about a change that's going to be a transdimensional change, ultimately.
Yes, 100%.
And now we have the physics community, like I belong to the American Physical Society, and we have Physical Review letters mm-hmm. every week. It's a book every week.
Mm-hmm.
And there are articles that happen fairly frequently, I mean, you know, more than once every few years,
sure.
about the discovery of sentient behavior in molecules.
Yep.
And once you understand that everything is consciousness, everything is intrinsic awareness, sentient behavior in molecules isn't such a far-out concept.
Right.
But if you're locked into that ping-pong ball molecular model from high school chemistry class, of that somehow or other existence having that kind of solidity,
yes.
and not realizing the profundity of the field that we're in and how we are a hallucination, as David Bohm said, we're the noise riding on the sea of infinity, you know.
It's beautiful.
And he was just another wonderful being who I was fortunate to get to know, and converse with, and to have this awareness. I mean, this is an important technology.
Right.
And the reason I'm doing this with you
mm-hmm.
is because I can't think of anything that is more important at this moment in human history than for people to get it.
Yep.
And people in power need to get it. In Washington, there should be float centers in Washington, D.C. There should be a float center in Congress. There should be a float center. I'm talking about in all of those office buildings, you know,
yep.
like the Hart Building, there should be a float center in the Hart Building.
Absolutely.
Because if we could get these guys to relax out of their own BS
mm-hmm.
and get in contact with who they really are, because it's not like they suddenly become the
Right.
devil.
Right.
They may seem like the devil temporarily. They may act like the devil temporarily. They may do
But
horrible, evil things.
It's not their true self.
But that's not their true nature.
No.
And one of the things that we've all learned from real physics happening right now
Right.
is that everything is space.
Yep.
And
Right.
space itself is consciousness.
Yep.
And the feeling of consciousness is love.
Yep. It's
And,
beautiful.
and when we're not like this, that's what we feel.
Yep.
So.
And it's coming, and you know that. And thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you. And we'll put the links, if you're listening to the audio, we'll put all the links you mentioned with your institute and everything you were talking about, and some
Sure.
of the songs you listened to on our website. And you know,
Sure.
it's a blessed time. To
Yeah,
be here.
and
Thank
with
you very
and
much.
with the tank that you guys are producing, you can use these tools
Yes.
in a way that has been kind of not altogether possible yet,
Right.
in the same way that it is
And
with your
it's
tank.
It's coming. It's coming.
And I mean, I have to say this, you know, because I'm very much looking forward to the next iteration
Right.
as well, because conscious participation
Yes.
is about understanding, listening, and I'm saying
Let's see if
this.
we can
I'm saying
electrocute
this.
the water safely.
I'm saying this. I hope the cameras are still running, because
Yeah.
I don't. This doesn't happen frequently from me, but I am really impressed with the way that you and your team have listened to yourselves and your own experience, as well as other people's experience.
Thank you.
And you've incorporated that, because there's other companies who have really nice tanks, and yet they haven't listened
Mhm.
in the same way. And the more we listen, the more we perfect this technology, the more regenerative it'll become, the more of a healing environment it'll become, more and
Right.
more healing environment. We all need to be healed.
Yes.
We're all traumatized. Everybody's walking around in PTSD.
Yes.
And the tank and floating is one of the most important things, and this needs to be appreciated. Veteran centers and every place else.
100%.
Anyway, I
Yep.
go on and on, but
No.
I
appreciate it.
have endless things that I feel about that process, and I deeply appreciate the fact that there is at least someone out there like you
Mhm.
and your guys and your fabulous female counterparts as well. And
You mean like the wives?
the wives, yeah, and yes, all of the above. And I'm very grateful to be so balanced as well sometimes. You know, and the sometimes is not a matter of somebody else, but allowing oneself to be balanced.
Right.
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 So,
Well, thank you. I got to end it.
yeah,
but,
I know.
But thank you very much. That's good.
Sorry, oops. Oh well,
Yeah.
another
Wash
shirt.
off.